Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here this afternoon. My name is Emily Dwyer, and I'm the State ITS Engineer for GDOT. And we're going to pull up some slides here. Thanks, Marc. Today, we're going to go over the ITS specifications and give kind of an update on what's changed so that everyone can be in the loop. Today, I'm joined by Marc Start from AECOM and Travis Hurt from AECOM. Next slide. So what is a specification? Hopefully, if you're joining this call today, you have at least a little bit of an idea of what that means. But really, the specification is what gives the detailed process and description of how bidding and construction should be performed. So it's really kind of the rules of the game and how everything should operate. Next slide. So here is where you can find the specifications on GDOT's website. I definitely encourage you to take a note of this location. We get asked all the time, where are the specs? I can't quite find them. So this is where you need to go to look, and you can see we've got the 2021 standard spec is kind of the first thing you'll see when you get there. Next slide. One of the things that we wanted to make sure everyone was very aware of is you can see here that the 2021 specification link is published and it's highlighted on the screen. There are also still live links to the 2013 spec and the 2016 supplemental. So just be very aware that those old specs are on there, but those are for projects that were let before these specifications were in place. So make sure that when you're using the links shown on the screen that you're using the correct one for the 2020 book. Next slide. Here's a little bit of detail that I think is really important and we want to make sure that everyone's up to date on. So in the publishing of a several thousand page document, some things got printed incorrectly. So here you can see on that same screen where you find the links to the different specifications, about midway down the page, there's a title that says Special and Project Specific Provisions. There's a drop down under that, and if you select Supplemental Specifications Not Published in the 2021 edition, you'll see that these couple additional specs populate. What you see below is including section 935. The reason that that's copied here is that an incorrect version was included in the 2021 book. And the way that that's updated is through this link shown on the page. So please make sure if you're looking for fiber optic systems that you come here and find the correct version of this specification. Another quick note is that section 940 was published in the book, the full version that's referenced above. That was no longer a current spec. So we want to make sure that no one's referencing that 940. The new version is 942. They're both in the book, so that can be a little confusing, but just make sure you know that 935, this is where you need to come to find that link, and 940 is obsolete and no longer needs to be included. This is just a real high-level overview of kind of what has changed to make sure that everyone's aware of what specs were involved in this update that recently went through. You can see the spec book, like I mentioned, is a couple thousand pages. We went over previously the traffic signal specifications and some of the changes that were implemented there. And today we're going to go through those ITS specs that you see and kind of give the details on what changed and some important things to note. And one other thing we want to note is there are different requirements for traffic signals in ITS projects. So just be very sure when you're doing your work, you're going through things that you understand the difference between those two and where to find the correct reference specifications. In addition to updating the specs, we've been doing a little bit of work on some of our other reference material as well. So you can see that our traffic signal group has updated some of their documentation. They have one guideline that's still pending. Our ITS documents, we have actually pushed out the specification, which we're talking about today. Our details, which are up on the website, but it may be a little confusing right now as we work through a couple bumps, because right now the new details and the old details are still showing on the website. So just be very cognizant of what the year on the version you're looking at is. There may be a newer version. We're working to clean that up, but it may stay up for a little while until it gets corrected. And last is our ITS design guidelines that were completed last year. One other thing I want to note here is that our standard operating procedures for QPL 48 have been updated as well. Those are available on the website, and anybody that dabbles in QPL, I'd just like to make the note, please send questions, submittals, anything in between to qpl48@dot.ga.gov. That helps us streamline that process. So as mentioned, the ITS design guidelines have been updated. If you haven't seen them, you don't have a copy, please reach out, make sure that you're looking at the latest version of that. It's so important that the designs that we're sending out to bid reflect the latest ITS design guidelines. There's quite a bit that's changed in this document, so just be very aware that there may be changes and you want to look at the latest version. And last, as mentioned, the ITS construction details. You can see we've updated a few of these, including the ITS legend, the ITS cabinet, DMS, and rent meter details. So just take a look at those on the website. Make sure you're finding, like I mentioned, the correct version, and know that those new details do apply to design as well. And our traffic signal design details have been updated as well, so they should be available on the website too. And now I'm going to hand it over to Marc Start, and he's going to dive in a little more deep into exactly what has changed.
Thanks, Emily. And I think everything's working here. We're just aware with the new 2021 spec book that there's definitely a more attention on the specifications in general. So I guess it's a good time to kind of roll out some ideas and some background on the ITS specifications. So we hope to maybe give you a little bit of structure information about the specs, but then also get into primarily the pay items, which are a bit changed, or certainly there's more of them in the ITS world. And just wanted to put a spotlight on that today to make sure that designers are comfortable with using these pay items. And certainly the pay items are the first path to happiness with respect to designs that are complete and contractors who know exactly what is getting paid for where. So those are really the major focus areas for today. And so I'm going to start with a bit of an overview, and then we're going to get into the pay item discussions itself, which I think is helpful for both the designers as well as for those that are bidding on the projects and understanding what's included where. So the important thing about ITS and the structure of how specifications support the design is that there's a section 942 ITS general requirements, which really apply to any ITS work. And we'll see more about that in just a minute. But basically the heart and soul of 942 is to talk about testing and integration during the construction process. That's something that's described once throughout all the ITS specifications, and it lies in section 942. And we think that is really the cohesive thing that holds together this idea that an ITS system is one system, and we think it needs to be tested as a single system. And that's how we can expect the system to work from the head end, the control side, so that all the devices that are controlled by a single system actually are shown to do so through the construction process. And then you can see the listing of 7 specifications that really represent the different applications of ITS. And in those specifications, we're primarily looking at the materials and the construction of those individual systems. So to dig a little bit deeper in section 942, this one spec that rules them all, so to speak, we have these primary sections: testing, integration, and then the acceptance process, the warranty, and training. And so if you're getting into an ITS project, I think it's worth your time to read section 942. It's about, I think, 35 pages. And it really covers the stuff that's all common to all ITS projects. And then in the remaining sections that are more the applications, the different devices that hang on an ITS network, our major sections are: what are the materials and how do you construct it? And then also, what is the method of measuring that pay item? And then what is the pay item itself? So this is a very quick run through of how the specs are structured. And this is not unique to ITS. This is how all GDOT specs are structured. The difference here being that section 942 includes things that are fully necessary for any ITS device that you're installing. Now, this goes back a little bit of time, and some of you were there. This goes back about 4 years when we had our stakeholder process to go through these specs and to have comments from stakeholders and vendors, distributors. I think we reconciled close to 1,000 comments through the process of holding stakeholder meetings and having reviews done by industry. So, as you can imagine, ITS keeps rolling along, right? It's technology. And so and as Emily mentioned, the QPL 48 email address is the place where if you're working through the use of these specifications and you find something unsavory, that would be great to drop a note and, through the normal process of updating things, we expect that would be taken care of. So, technology has already changed from 4 years ago. We know that. And that is a continuous cycle that GDOT intends to continue with updating the specs. Also, the details were updated. The legend was updated. So as you compile plans, keep an eye out for making sure you've got the latest plan details in your plan set. So now we're going to dig into each specification individually. And we're going to definitely do highlights here. Our goal is to be done talking in probably 20 minutes or so that we've got plenty of time to talk about any questions or comments you have, being an open house. So, our goal is to just give you the high level overview, and hopefully this is useful for overall structure. So in 942, we've got some definitions, and we also have over 200 acronyms, ITS being quite acronym heavy. It covers 6 pages. It may actually be worth a reference for you as you do ITS, just given its comprehensiveness. We also have all the submittal requirements in 942, and just some other highlights is the rules for maintaining the construction and system during construction is spelled out in this section. And the highlighted one, the configuration and integration, that's really the heart and soul of getting back to the fact that an ITS system is one system. And so there is a pay item that we'll see in a minute that is required essentially for all ITS projects. And then the last items there's the requirements for surge protection and grounding as well in this section. So this is the pay item I was referring to. It's a lump sum pay item. There was in the previous iteration in section 940, there was a somewhat similar pay item. And the key here is that if you are growing a communications network and you're adding a ring, or you're reconfiguring rings, or you're adding devices that will be tied to Navigator and managed by Navigator, most likely you need to have this pay item included in the plan set to handle configuration of the devices and the integration. So this may be a small task, this may be a large task, depending on the project. And section 942 has a step-by-step section that describes how does the contractor make requests of GDOT and coordinate with GDOT IT, and those things that are necessary in order to figure out how are we going to get this device on the network and how is it going to be operated by the network successfully so that we can get to final acceptance and the project is done. The caveat here, and we're going to look at each of these specification pay item lists, and there will always be notes below because there are always kind of notes to how to use these pay items. In this case, while integration is covered by this pay item, the testing of the devices remains part of the pay item for each individual device. Testing is not part of the 942 pay item as it's paid for, but instead it remains part of whether it's the DMS, the camera, the environmental sensor station, what have you. The testing remains resident with the device. So moving into these applications now, first one being dynamic message signs. And generally speaking, there's many more pay items. Things were broken into different types primarily, and just recognizing that, you know, the ITS market has grown. There's just so many more devices now. You know, our goal was to provide some more specificity, but also more flexibility. So I can imagine that in a project, there may be a DMS size not represented here. And I'll go through these in a minute, but that would be okay. It's certainly possible to create a pay item, but then still rely on the standard spec for most of the detail that you're requiring in that DMS. So let's put it this way, the heavy lifting is done, but there's still room for more specificity as you create an ITS project. So in this case, we've got a couple DMS types at the beginning there that are the walk-in enclosures. So this would be the type that's affixed to overhead truss system, like on a freeway. We also then have several types that are front access enclosures, which means you would only access the sign by its face. There's no walk-in element behind the sign face. And at the end there is a couple types that are either embedded or front access. And by embedded, we mean there's certainly kinds of DMS signs that are part of a static sign. And so we would call that an embedded into the static sign. And that would be treated very similarly to a front access sign. So, you know, here's plenty of sign sizes with different character heights. Hopefully this gives a bit of a understanding of, you know, what's our standard signs like. And I think this fits probably the majority of cases, but certainly there's more that could be considered. The field cabinet would be paid for separately from the DMS in this case. And the DMS pay item does not include any part of the structural elements, whether it's the sign structure or, you know, the access platform, the catwalk, whatever you want to call that. All those things are covered under section 638. And it also does not include the communication element of the DMS. So here's the list of pay items. And the first one is the pay item that would cover the sign types 1 through 7 that you just saw. The remaining pay items are essentially if somebody desires to buy essentially spare parts. And that would be at the discretion of the project, of course, but that should not be confused with spare parts that come without additional costs. So there's actually two things in play, and that's added in the notes below. There are spare parts that come with no additional cost. Those are more my typical maintenance replacement parts. But then this list includes items that could be purchased in addition, should that be desired. And just some other notes below there. The controller is included in the DMS, the controller for the sign messaging and so forth. And then testing is included in the DMS, but the integration would be covered in our 942 pay item. The second application is related to road weather. And in this case, we're calling them ESS, or environmental sensor stations. These are kind of self-explanatory in that you would have a weather station, a standalone weather station. Type 1 would be where you'd have an existing pole or a new structure installed, and then this pay item would be applied to that structure, and you would have conventional power, and you'd have some array of sensors mounted to the pole or to the pavement nearby, and so forth. The second type would be the same thing, but instead of conventional power, it would be solar powered, which certainly changes the equation substantially for the components, since we have to have items that draw very minimal power. And then the third type would be if these devices were mobile, that is mounted to a truck. So all three of these options are available. And what it doesn't include is a structure, and it doesn't include the communication. Those things would be separate items applied to this situation. So here's our pay items, and it's not unlike DMS in that the first one is this define what type you wanted, whether it's the normal, the solar powered, or the mobile type of environmental sensor station. And then after that is really a la carte sensors that you could add to the environmental sensor station. The spec includes a nominal number of devices, sensor devices for these different types. But if you want more, if you would like to have like a subsoil sensor added, you would simply add that as a pay item, and then that sensor suite gets added to the environmental sensor station. So there's plenty of notes here. I won't go through them all. I trust you've been able to download the presentation and the ITS design checklist from the ITS Georgia website, and that can be a good reference. But hopefully this gives you the sense of, what is included in the pay item, what's not included in the pay item, and to make sure you've buttoned up all the pieces necessary. Moving on to wireless communication equipment. This is a relatively short spec that defines essentially three classes of wireless, 10 megabytes per second, 50 and 100 megabytes per second throughput. And this is all unlicensed frequencies. So it's basically in different categories. And then the fourth category being essentially 4G cellular, that is obviously used in many places. But here's your options for wireless. It does not include a cabinet, as noted, and does not include the structure. So this is the electronics, brackets, wiring aspect that are included in this pay item. So like other pay items, it's got the type. You pick your type by putting the number in the blank. And essentially this is set up so that it's per location, per radio transceiver, or per cellular router. And so that really means it's basically for every radio, you would have a quantity of 1, since this is in each item. And we also included a pay item for a wireless system survey. And the thinking here is that, as you're plotting the design, sometimes a wireless survey is an obvious need because of the complexity of the situation. Sometimes it's possibly kind of obvious that it's probably going to work. But in this case, this gives you the option to include a wireless survey in the pay items, which requires the contractor to go and do a wireless path evaluation, do the calculations, look for interference, and basically proof the wireless link that you're thinking about before they go build it. So again, this is not a requirement, but maybe gives you a little peace of mind that that this wireless path is in fact viable before the contractor goes out and actually builds it. Then going on to section 939, which is got a lot of elements to it, and we're not going to spend the time and look at all of them, but the two that are the most prevalent are, first of all, the switch for the communications network. And in this case, there's 5 switch types, A through E. And the type that, for instance, if you were working on the SIGOPS network, the most prevalent type of switch going on in cabinets for that application would be a type A switch. But of course, it's good to make sure that whatever agency you're working for is comfortable with the switch capability. And so, that's left to that coordination that goes on before a communication system is launched to make sure that the client is satisfied with the type of communications gear. And so you can see that, as you go to type E, you're getting more capability for the communications network. And then the other very common application is the cabinets. And in this case, the typical kind of ITS cabinet that would most normally be applied would be a type 2, but there are a few other types based on size. And then there's type 4, which is actually allowing for 4 doors, doors on the front and back of the cabinet, if in fact that's useful for the location. So you get 4 cabinets to choose from. As you can tell, there's plenty of options going on in these specifications. And so it's important that you're in touch with the owner, the client, to make sure that they're getting exactly what they need for the application. And here's our pay items. Like I said, there's other things in the specification we're not going to go through, like there's UPS devices, there's an enhanced security lock for the cabinet. There's an SFP fiber module. Most people would refer to these as GBICs. We used a more standard name, which is small form factor programmable, pluggable, as maybe a more generic name. So when you see SFP, think GBICs. Testing is included in these devices, but of course, integration of the communications is included in our old friend, section 942. I'm going to pass it off to Travis. He's going to cover the remaining specifications in the suite, and then also talk about a checklist that I'm hoping you've been able to download.
Thanks, Mark. I'll start in with 935 if I can get my screen pulled up. All right. So 935 talks about fiber optic systems. And I want to start off with a couple kind of definitions. So if you can tell, starting from number 3 here, we had a couple others, but we want to focus on what's changed. So things we wanted to mention here: fiber optic interconnect cable. That is the factory connectorized cable, runs from the splice tray to the bulkhead connector panel within your fiber patch panel. And then a fiber pigtail cable being the same thing with a single cable, a single fiber cable. And we want to point those out specifically because what is not included in this spec is the pre-terminated FDCs. So gator patches are out, and you need to be cognizant of these cables included in your patch panels. So I'm mentioning patch panels, and so that's the other term on here. We're talking about FPPs and FDUs. So your fiber optic patch panel, which is your fiber termination within the cabinet. I'm saying cabinet for the patch panel. These are the smaller of the 2 units, having 6 to 36 ports, and the FDUs are your fiber distribution units, which are probably used in hub buildings or hub cabinets, I guess, having more ports, 48 or more ports. And we're kind of standardizing with that term, FPP and FDU. These are what we used to refer to sometimes as FDCs and sometimes as patch panels or FDUs. So we're trying to standardize that and call them FPPs for the smaller units and FDUs for the larger units and avoid any sort of confusion. And so what's a little bit different about what we're doing now also is that we're specifically quantifying these by the number of ports. And previously with FDCs, we had talked about we're looking at the number of fibers, and that can be a little bit confusing for some people. So we wanted to straighten that out and avoid any confusion. And then, like Emily mentioned before, the 935 specification in the 2021 spec book is the old version. So make sure you see the updated supplemental specification for that. So these are the pay items for that 935 section, including, all of your cables and everything. And you can see on here, fiber patch panels and fiber distribution units towards the bottom, quantified by the number of ports. And you can also see with the splice closures, those are done by number of splices now rather than fibers to sort out that same confusion that could occur. So the testing of each individual item is included with the item, but the testing of that overall system would be included in that integration under the section 942 item. And then there are still legacy items available for multi-mode or hybrid systems if that's what you need. So they're still included. And I'll move on to section 936, CCTV. So previously, this section could be, it was a little bit kind of piecemeal together. We had, we had analog types and we had a PD, HD type, and then just kind of a non-specified whatever spec type. So we've broken out the HD types of cameras here to be a little more specific about what we're looking for each type. So you've got type 1, which is your pan, tilt, zoom, dome type camera. This is going to be your typical intersection monitoring camera. And then you've got type 2, which is a pan, tilt, zoom turret type camera, and type 3, which is your fixed type camera. So something for DMS monitoring probably would be type 3. And all of these are HD type cameras, and we've got both pressurized and non-pressurized versions of both, if that's what you need. But as previously, the support structures are paid for separately. Obviously, poles have always been paid for separately, but we have some specific items for support arms as well. And this does not include communication beyond the cabinet or controller. So here are those items. We've got the CCTV camera system, and this is a per each item still. This is not a change from previously. So it is the camera system, including the camera and the wiring back to the cabinet and your PTOE injectors and those sorts of things. But it's still an each item, so each camera is paid for separately. And then we've got the mounting arms, and you can see the types down at the bottom, different types of mounting arms. So you've got type 1 is your short horizontal arm, just kind of getting the camera maybe off the pole. You've got type 2 is the longer arm. I think a lot of times those were paid for more as luminaire arms, or I don't know what other solutions people might have been using, but usually included in type 3 and 4 are vertical arms. I think some of those other types have been included kind of incidentally. I know some local jurisdictions make sure to put those on there specifically, but now there are specific GDOT pay items for these also. So be sure to include the mounting arm pay item if that is necessary. And then like I said before, the testing of the item is included, but any networking and integration is still under that section 942 pay item. And any separate field cabinets are, I would say, another separate pay item not included with the camera pay item. So there are still legacy equipment for this also. There is still an analog camera in the pay item summary. So should you need that, it's also still available. All right, moving on to section 937. This is where there's some overlap in the traffic signal specifications. We talked about those a little bit last month, but definitely worth mentioning again here. This is where there's some bigger changes in the way that things have been done. So the main thing to note here is, one, that we have all these separate systems, and two, that they're all quantified as lump sum systems. So instead of paying for each component of the system individually, the contractor is responsible for providing a fully functional detection system at each location. So this isn't as big of a change for something like a wire, or for a, let's say, a microwave detection system where you had a system item similar to cameras before, where you'd pay for a detector and the wiring and cabinet items under that system. But instead of having 4 separate systems, those will all be included in one lump sum system. And so the same sort of thing would be the case for a video detection system. But it is a bigger change for pedestrian detection systems and loop induction or inductance loop systems, where each of those components have been broken out separately. They've often been paid for under a traffic signal lump sum. And so we're breaking all those out separate from the traffic signal, but all included in their own lump sum. So if we're talking about a pedestrian detection system, you're talking about the buttons, the wiring, the isolators, all of that is going to be included in one lump sum for each location. And each location here being each individual controller or cabinet. So the same thing with the loop detection system. If you're talking about a traffic signal, you're going to want to pull those items out of the lump sum traffic signal item and include them in their own separate inductance loop detection system, one per location. So the other thing to note, I guess, that I want to point out is we have these temporary vehicle detection systems and maintenance of vehicle detection systems, noting the necessity of having continuous detection at certain locations. So a temporary detection system would be where the contractor essentially brings their own system to use while the permanent system is out of commission during construction. Or a maintenance of the vehicle detection system would be where the detection system could remain in place, but needs to be adjusted for, say, a multi-stage or a multi-phase construction project where the detection zones would need to be located in different areas each stage. So the important thing to note about these, and this isn't necessarily intuitive, is that a designer needs to make sure that we note which type of detection system this is. So for most of these, type A systems are for your mainline freeway applications, and type B systems are for traffic signals or ramp meters. It's a little bit different for the pedestrian system. Hopefully, you're not installing pedestrian systems on freeways. So type A pedestrian system is just your standard push button sort of detection. And a type B system is your audible detection systems. And so just quickly running through a detection system design process. Most of these steps are similar to what we should have been doing already up to this point. So you select the appropriate detection system technology, talking with the local agency maintaining or operating system to find that system. And then, as always, show the detection zones. If they're, if they're virtual zones, show where they're intended to be. If they're loops, obviously show the loops. We're still trying to show the whole system, but then we need to make sure to call out which type of system we're talking about, that A or B. And again, as always, we're going to call out, or we're going to show all of the supporting infrastructure for the installation. So we'll assume all of these items that we're showing are available for use unless they're not noted specifically. So the contractor is responsible for a working system. So unless anything is noted as not being available, they can assume that that is available. And then if anything is not shown on the plans and they need additional poles or conduit or any other sort of infrastructure, they would need to include that additional cost in the detection system pay item. And so we put together this checklist, and it is, I believe, included in the ITS design guidelines to make sure that we are addressing each of these new ways of doing things as we're going through here. So it will take you to determining which type of network and whose network you should be on, and make sure that you are communicating with the network administrator to make sure that what you're trying to put in is going to work. And then including all these new ITS pay items, you probably can't see very clearly at this scale, but as you go through the steps, then you come across specifically with these new pay items that you should be looking for in the pay item index. I know old pay items are still available, so make sure that you're using the new ones unless you're specifically trying to address legacy items in there. And depict that detection system as it has been, but with specific types called out. And we've shown the detection pay items there again. So make sure to look for those updated items. And then, as Marc pointed out before, there's an updated ITS legend. Be sure to include that newer version. And also we've got the updated details and for both the ITS and traffic signal. So those should be included as well, and make sure you get the current version of those. But this is available, I believe, on the ITS Georgia website and also in the ITS design guidelines. And
thanks,
so
Travis.
I turn it back over.
If I can just jump in a second, what we covered a month ago on detection was more comprehensive, so you may want to review that video, but certainly detection is the thing that crosses over between ITS and traffic signals. So there's definitely some things to think about and some new options available there.
All right, guys, I think we're going to switch gears and go into the questions we've received, if that was all, Marc.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so we've got a few from Austin Avercamp. Thanks, Austin, for your questions. And I encourage everyone to be sending their questions in while we go through the few that have been submitted so far. So the first question is, will the ITS 05 platform detail be updated to reflect both a below ground and above ground platform, i.e. what is shown now on the detail and the above ground being similar to Northwest Corridor platforms? That's a good question, Austin. To my knowledge, we did not update the 05 detail because those above ground installations have predominantly been on, exactly like you mentioned, on Northwest Corridor, on some of those locations where we see them as kind of a specialized installation. So we don't currently have a plan to modify the ITS 05 detail. Anything from Marc or Travis you'd like to add?
No.
Okay. We'll run on to the next question, also from Austin. Any plans to include CV to X in the 926 specification? So we don't currently have any plan to add that to an existing specification. I do think that we will see that become a standalone spec in the future, or it may get integrated into one of the existing specs, but we don't have any current plans for that at this time. Moving right along, again from Austin. When will a QSFP28 be added to the QPL and specification to integrate with the hub switch type A? So I'll take on the QPL portion and maybe throw the spec portion over to Marc. We don't typically QPL this type of device. We consider a lot of these things incidental. You may have noticed that we also don't have cable and conduit on the QPL right now. So at this time, those are not being included from a QPL standpoint, but they are expected to meet the current specification. And Marc, do you want to speak to how the specification integrates with the hub switch type A?
So, I'm not a communication network gear guy, so I'm not surprised that there is something that could be added to the spec, and I think it's just GDOT's decision whether it's worth opening up the spec at this time to address this, or as we're going through the QPL update process right now, we're hoping that there will be additional opportunities, in the near term to update the spec, but I assume those have not yet been scheduled or considered, Emily.
Thanks, Marc. And yeah, great point. We're always accepting comments and areas for improvement. So if you see something in the spec that you think doesn't quite add up or maybe needs some modification, shoot it over an email to me, and we keep kind of a running file so that we can try to catch those things next time. All right. Our next few questions are from a brand new guy to the industry. Most of you probably don't know him, Mr. Matt Glasser. His first question is, for ITS projects that may have 40 different locations, how should those be called out in the quantity summary sheet in the plans? That's a great question. I think something similar came up during the Signal version of this update meeting. So as Travis mentioned, the way we're doing the pay item is lump sum per location. So in the ITS world, you may see that, yes, there's 40 different locations. And so each of those would need to be reflected as a lump sum at that location. And Marc, correct me if I'm wrong there.
That's correct.
So it is a little bit of a change from how we've done things historically. And it maybe feels a little awkward that first time that you're going in and doing it this way. But it is trying to capture that, getting that lump sum at each location just to kind of streamline the process. Another question from Matt Glasser. As a designer, how should I know which type of detection, such as radar, video, loop, etc., I should use? This is a great question. We've gone into some overview of the type of detection in the design guidelines, both ITS and Signals, if I'm not mistaken, and kind of gives some information for the designers on what are the types of detection that should be used in what locations, what is the things that need to be considered to make sure that you're installing the correct detection at a location. You also will find that this can be assigned on a project. The client may specify that they have a preference for a certain type of detection. So you can really either find guidance in the ITS design guidelines or potentially specific requirements written into the project from GDOT or from the local jurisdiction, depending on who you're working with. Another Matt question. Similarly, how should I know what type of mounting arm to use for CCTVs? Again, I'm going to say I think this is ITS design manual question. We give a little bit of guidance on where and when to use those mounting arms. Really what that advantage is with the mounting arm is getting that improved visibility if potentially you're in a curve or you're in a location with a lot of tree coverage, to really get that camera to a position where it has good or better visibility. So that information is all covered in our ITS design manual, and I encourage everyone to go take a look. The last question I've got for now, I'm hoping more on the way in, is from Winnie Long. The question is, I noticed the 2021 details have a watermark that says maintenance repairs only. Are there current equivalent details that should be used instead for proposed design? I'll have to double check this one. I don't recall that watermark being on there. So it may be that that was included in error, unless Marc, do you happen to know?
I think that what's being referred to were not the details that we've updated. There certainly could be there's plenty of details on that site So I don't think it's the ones that were recently updated. I can't answer the question. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Winnie, if you don't mind, could you give us one of the detailed numbers that you're looking at so that we can have that for reference to make sure that there's no issues with what was posted for the ITS side? We'll keep an eye out for that in the chat. That's all the questions I've gotten so far. Is there anything else? Ah, I see one coming in. This question says, the watermark is there. I saw them too. So we'll have to take a look and make sure exactly which details those are, but it may just be that that was an error. So thank you for catching that, and we'll take a look. And Matt Glasser submitted the question, did I hear correctly that DMS controllers are included within the DMS type blank pay item? And the answer to that is yes. I don't see any more questions coming in. We definitely appreciate the questions that have been asked today. And it doesn't mean that your time to ask questions has ended just because our call ends today. You're always welcome to submit questions to myself, to others in the ITS group at GDOT, and we're happy to provide clarification. I also, like we've mentioned, encourage you to not only look at the updated spec, but also the details and the design guidelines that support those, so that you're really getting that full picture of the process and not just a limited view. It looks like I only got part of Winnie's response. It says, these are some quick examples dated 2021. There are more of these, but I didn't get the examples. They didn't come through. So we will take a look though and make sure we close the loop there. Thank you. I don't see any more questions coming in. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up a couple minutes early. But I want to thank Marc and Travis for their time today and helping out with giving this update to everyone. And I want to thank everybody for coming with good questions and really, you know, making sure that what we've got posted up on the website is correct and that we catch any of those details that have been overlooked. So thanks everyone, and we appreciate your time.
Thanks, Emily.